The red emergency light went on and the siren started going off. "We can't contain the energy field." Someone screamed. There was a loud explosion and a blinding light. Then it all went black. I opened my eyes and found myself lying face down on sand. I felt disoriented and weak. My arms trembled as I tried to raise myself off the ground. I was finally able to sit cross-legged on the sand. I had a few scrapes on my arms, and I noticed a tear on the pants of my army fatigues. Where am I? And what am I doing above ground on the surface? I thought to myself. I quickly looked around the area near me and saw bodies and machine parts scattered all over the place. I looked at my calendar watch, the one my wife gave me last Christmas. It was 9:15 a.m., September 30th, 1966. The experiment had commenced at 7 a.m. I had been out for at least an hour. As I slowly raised myself to my feet, I turned around and saw that I was sat in the center of a sizable debris field. "Major Dorsey," I heard someone say from behind me. I turned and saw Sergeant Perez, our chief electrician, struggling to get up from the ground. I ran over to him and helped him to his feet.
"What the hell happened, sir?"
"Your guess is as good as mine, Sergeant. The most disturbing part of all this is, it appears we're no longer in an underground base in Alaska, but above ground in what seems like a barren desert." Perez quickly looked up from dusting himself off and did a quick 360, and then he realized what I said was true.
"How could this happen, sir?"
"Experiment malfunction is what the Army will call it, no doubt," I replied. "Help! Dr. Holt is dead!" I heard a voice yell out. We ran over to Lawrence Kincaid, Dr. Holt's assistant, kneeling beside the doctor. I looked down at the partially charred remains of Dr. Holt, the missions team Lieutenant Jameson, and Captain McRaney. "God almighty!" I exclaimed. "What happened?" Kincaid looked up to me.
"The last thing I remembered is that they were all standing by the control panel when the energy field went out of control, and then the control panel exploded. They must have been caught in the explosion. Dr. Holt was a great man."
"Don't move." I heard the distinctive sound of a gun hammer being cocked back. We turned and came face to face with another assistant of the late doctor, Miss Tanya Baker. She had a very sharp piece of metal protruding from her side. Her lab coat was covered in blood.
"Explain what has happened here,"
she said in a heavy foreign accent.
"I thought you were from North Carolina."
"Well, I am not, y'all. Idiot. I ask the questions here."
"You sound Russian, which means you're a spy, and more than likely the saboteur responsible for all of this."
"No, I was not the cause of this."
"So I guess we're just supposed to believe you, comrade?"
"I do not care what you believe, American imbecile. You, Kincaid, tell me what happened. And what is this place, or I will kill you where you stand."
"Okay, no need for violence. We started the breach sequence in the chamber. Everything was going fine. We commenced by going up different power levels, hoping to create an opening or doorway. We went up 11 different power levels, as you know, until we started to detect power surges coming from the test chamber. The power readings began to grow. That's when the doctor turned to me and said we had done it. Unfortunately, that's when the energy field emanating from the breach started to grow too strong and too fast to be contained by the test chamber's protective shielding. My guess is the power field overloaded our instruments in the control room. Since Dr. Holt was operating the control panel just outside the test chamber, it caused his panel to explode, killing Dr. Holt, Jameson, and McRaney. It more than likely damaged the connections to the smasher and the reactor, cutting its power source, but not before the field had engulfed the rest of the control room. You know, like when the tide comes onto a beach and it takes whatever it finds in its way and takes it back out to the sea. For all intents and purposes, that's what happened to us. As for where we are, if Dr. Holt's theory was right, this is a parallel world that may exist alongside our own. This is another dimension.
Then, all of a sudden, the Russian was jumped from behind by a thin soldier with short red hair. They both fell to the ground. He was trying to wrestle the gun away from her. The sergeant and I were about to jump in when I heard a shot ring out. The young soldier got up. The spy was lying motionless on the ground. Perez moved over to her, leaned over and put his fingers to the side of her neck. "She's dead," he declared. The sergeant grabbed the gun and walked back towards us.
What do we do now?
"Sergeant, and you? Excuse me, what's your name, son?"
Pvt O'Grady, sir!
"You and the private look to see what supplies we can scavenge. Kincaid and I will see if anyone else survived this little trip." Kincaid turned to me and said,
Wait, who put you in charge?
"The United States Army," I replied, and pointed to the gold oak leaf on my collar. "This is a military project.
You're just an electrical engineer.
I am a soldier first and foremost. Anyone else got a problem with that?" The sergeant and the private both snapped to attention.
No, sir, Major.
I'm just a soldier in this man's army. I go where I'm told to go, and I do what I'm told to do.
An hour later, we had managed to gather the bodies of the dead and put them side by side. Perez and O'Grady had assembled a pile of supplies that we could use to survive on. O'Grady came up to me and said, "Sir, I found these binoculars in the pack of Lieutenant Jameson." "Great. Let's take a look and see what's out there." I looked through the binoculars. I had to turn a couple of different directions before I saw something far off in the distance. I focused on what seemed to be a light brown mountain range. As it happened, it was the only thing around us. "Well, men, that seems like the only thing for miles. At the very least, it might provide us protection, and depending on how big it is, we may be able to get a better view of any other structures, natural or man-made."
Begging your pardon, sir, how far away is it?
"That I can't tell, Private. It could be a several days walk from here."
The communications device was damaged, so we can't contact the base. It will also take several months for the army to rebuild the doorway. This is a top-secret project with no guarantee of rescue if something should go wrong.
"We must face the facts, men, that this may be a one-way trip. We all know we can't stay here and we don't have enough supplies to live out here. And as Kincaid said, rescue may never come. No, that mountain range is our only hope for now. And while it may only be a first step, it's one we need to take." I was packing our supplies into one of the backpacks when I noticed someone had moved the spy's body out of line. "Who moved her body out of line?" Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked down at her body. "Not me," they all responded.
Maybe it was the wind. Private, move the body back in line.
Yes, sir.
"I'll move it, Sarge," I said as I walked towards it. I saw the body move. "What the hell?" I yelled out. Then it stopped. Perez ran up to me and asked,
What's wrong, Major?
"I just saw the body move like something was dragging it along the ground."
Maybe you should sit down and have some water, sir.
Then the body moved again. "There, Sergeant, did you see that?"
Yes, I did, sir.
Perez stared shocked. I reached down and grabbed her leg. I kept the body from moving forward. Then that's when we saw it come out from under her. It was a dark, long centipede-looking thing, with a segmented body at least a foot long. It turned and began to advance towards me at a rapid pace. I pulled my gun out and shot at it. It stepped back after getting hit, but continued coming at me. Perez and I discharged several rounds at it before it stopped advancing. Kincaid was the first to look at the remains.
It has a very thick exoskeleton, much like armor plating. That's why it was able to stand the first few rounds.
So far, this is the only form of life we have seen on this world. I hope this is not the only type of life here.
Sergeant, at least we can kill it if we have to.
Amen to that.
Kincaid, how did Dr. Holt come up with this parallel worlds theory in the first place?
It's not his theory. Dr. Holt was brought onto this project after World War II. The basis of this research was developed by both Russian and German scientists before the war. Dr. Holt claims they were gifted the technology from beings from another world.
What? Another world?
His words, not mine. It was then that the Germans first developed a primitive type of machine to breach dimensions. They started by sending through an automatic film camera. It had taken pictures of a new world in another dimension. That first device was what we used to build the machine your team installed, named the Smasher. Its name pretty much tells you what it does. It smashes its way through dimensions by opening a doorway.
Kincaid, change into these fatigues and boots. Ditch the lab coat and tie. We're headed into rough terrain. Captain McRaney is not going to need them anymore. We walked for several miles until I spotted something in the distance. I grabbed my binoculars and focused in on what appeared to be a narrow and shallow stream up ahead. Sarge, do you see what I see? I handed Perez the binoculars. He looked through them, smiled, and then shouted,
It's a stream.
When we finally came up on the stream, we were amazed. It was the clearest water I had ever seen. I pulled out a clear plastic test tube. I kneeled down by the side of the stream and scooped up a small amount. I first put it next to my nose to see if it emitted some kind of odor. It had no smell. I lifted it towards the light. It had nothing swimming around in it. Well, Kincaid, what do you think? I handed it to him.
Looks good to me. Should we put the water purification tablets in first to try and clean it up and then wait an hour before drinking it?
It's the best tasting water I've ever had.
We all turned and looked at the private drinking water out of his cupped hands.
O'Grady, you weren't supposed to drink any until the Major said it was okay.
Sorry, sir. Should I stop?
It's too late now.
We watched O'Grady for an hour, then an additional hour to make sure. Kincaid and I looked him over one more time. We then all took a drink. It tasted fresh and almost sweet. I ordered that we fill our canteens with this water. I hope this water doesn't kill us, I said to Kincaid.
Well, we should know soon if it's infested with bacteria. O'Grady will probably feel ill first.
We had been walking for several hours without a break. I ordered the men to stop. The sandy mountain range was definitely looking closer. Well, men, it looks like we can be anywhere from a day or two from reaching the mountains.
I sure hope so, sir.
Let's break for lunch here. We'll rest for an hour, then get underway before nightfall. We all sat on the sand and passed the can opener around. What's on the menu for lunch, Private?
Well, Major, we have a choice of beans, franks, and chili.
I'll have the chili. First, let's build a fire. Sarge, why don't you and the Private go gather some firewood over by those rocks? Kincaid, go look for some in that direction. I was picking up some twigs when I heard a loud scream. I turned to Kincaid. What was that? It sounds like O'Grady. We ran back to camp and saw O'Grady running around and screaming. I saw something long and red on his head. The Sarge was running around after O'Grady, yelling, "Stop running!" As I got closer, I came upon a horrific sight. It looked like a huge yellow jacket with big transparent wings that made this fluttering noise. O'Grady fell to the ground. This thing was still attached. The Sarge grabbed its tail and cut it off with his bayonet. The thing let out some sort of high-pitched buzz. I grabbed it by its wings and yanked it as hard as I could. I fell backward. I had managed to pull off its wings, but the rest of it fell to the ground. Kincaid was tending to O'Grady.
Sergeant Perez, get me the first aid kit.
I got back to my feet and ran over to him. How bad is it?
I can't tell. It left its stinger in O'Grady's neck.
The sergeant came over with the medical supplies. Kincaid carefully removed the stinger and put some hydrogen peroxide on it. Then he dressed the wound. Then we looked at the remains of the thing that attacked him. Is it me or are the insects from this world getting bigger and harder to kill? We all nodded our heads. Like it or not, men, we need to get out of this area. Just in case there may be more of these things nearby. How you feeling, Private?
I'm feeling fine, sir.
I hate to ask this of you, but you think you can walk a few more hours before we make camp for the night?
Yes, sir, Major. I can walk a few more miles for today, especially if it puts some distance between us and whatever those bugs are.
Good man, Private. So we packed up and headed forward in hopes of avoiding more problems. We walked for 3 more hours before making camp. I awoke from a deep sleep. I thought I heard something like a deep shriek or scream. I sat up and tried to listen for that noise again. There was nothing but silence. I finally decided to lay back down and go to sleep. I opened my eyes and stared up at the face of Perez.
Major? Major, please, wake up.
What's going on?
Please, come quickly. O'Grady is sick, something bad. Kincaid asked me to come get you.
I climbed out of my sleeping bag and rushed over to O'Grady, who was lying on the floor in his sleeping bag. Kincaid was kneeling over him. He turned, got up, and walked towards me.
Major, we have a problem. This morning, the Sarge woke me and told me O'Grady's wound was swollen to the size of an orange. He also had a very high fever.
What? I responded. Don't we have any antibiotics in that medical kit? No. I checked it and it must have been burnt up with McRaney's pack, he said. Then, all of a sudden, we heard a moan and turned to see O'Grady thrashing about the ground. Kincaid screamed out, "He's having a seizure! Hold him down!" I yelled to the Sarge. Then, all of a sudden, he stopped moving altogether. I leaned down and took his pulse. He's dead. Was the sting poisonous?
Maybe. It also could be some form of anaphylactic shock. He might have been allergic to it like a bee sting.
He was a good kid. I made an entry in my notebook. If we ever got out of here and back home, I was recommending him for a medal, posthumously. The next morning, we had finally reached the mountain range. We had struggled to get to this moment. We walked into the space between the 2 mountains. They were large sand rock formations, smooth with no vegetation whatsoever on them. We immediately felt a drastic drop in temperature because of the shadow cast by the mountains. We made it, men.
Well, most of us did, sir.
Unfortunately, that's true.
What should we do first?
We'll explore what we can down the rest of this path to find a secure place to make camp. Then tomorrow we'll use some of that climbing equipment in our packs, climb to the top of one of these mountains to get a bird's eye view of the surrounding area. At first daylight, we all got up and prepared for the ascent up the face of the mountain. We all agreed Kincaid and I would climb to the top and survey the area in hopes of finding our way out of this desert to some populated area and people or whatever passed for people here. Perez would stay behind just to assist if anything happened to us on the hike. I had some basic training with mountain climbing while in the army. Kincaid had some experience hiking out west. We felt our way through pretty well, and just before 10 a.m., we got to the top. We both screamed our heads off in joy. Then we carefully looked northeast and west. We saw a whole lot of deserts as we suspected. Then we took out the binoculars to carefully scan the area.
I see something.
What is it, man?
Looks like another mountain range, but it has green mountains. It looks like vegetation.
Let me see that. I grabbed the binoculars to see for myself. I saw the very far-off range of mountains with what looked like a lush pine forest. Yes! I screamed out in joy. That will be our next trek. We started to discuss the logistics on our way down the mountain. After reaching the bottom, we wondered where Perez was. We got out of our gear and returned to camp to find it empty. Where could he be?
He probably went exploring for water, not knowing when we'd be back. I don't blame him.
We waited another 30 minutes, then 30 more. Kincaid was the first to admit he was now worried. I said, let's split up. You take one side of the canyon, I'll take the other. I gave him a gun. We meet back here in 20 minutes, no matter what. Then we'll decide what to do next.
Okay.
A half an hour later, I was returning to camp when I heard a scream. It sounded like Kincaid's voice. I spent a good part of an hour trying to chase the last scream I heard from Kincaid. These canyon walls bounced sound off them pretty good. The sounds could have really come from any direction. I sat down on a rock to catch my breath when I heard an ungodly roar, a cross between a bear and a lion coming from behind me. It was like something out of Greek mythology. It was a 30-foot-tall giant. It had purple skin and long white hair, and one red eye in the center of its head. It had 4 arms. I jumped to my feet and began to run. This must be the thing that took out Perez and Kincaid, and apparently was not full yet. I felt something grab me from behind and pull me backward. I felt a tightness around my chest. Felt a couple of ribs pop. All I could hear was this loud scream getting closer and closer.
We disembarked the helicopter, and my aides and I were escorted down into the bowels of the underground base. As I approached the door, a lieutenant walked up to me and saluted.
General McManus, I trust your flight here was well?
I returned the salute. It was fine, Lieutenant. Where's Colonel Cartwright?
I spoke to him. He's inspecting the reactor core.
As I walked into the operations room, I saw in front of me the most bizarre sight I've ever seen. A large part of the wall ceiling and flooring were just gone. I could see exposed wiring and the stone floor.
Comrade, come in. I have all information and calculation to reproduce the experiment. Agent Alexandra is missing and presumed to have perished in explosion. I am preparing to leave base in all this confusion. I must sign off. The Americans will soon notice I am missing and start to investigate. I am now leaving for the rendezvous.